It's interesting his politics because he was an advocate for the Luddites and Catholic emancipation and also against the removal of the Elgin marbles. He was a Whig, but in a sense, he was also quite radical. What's your read on that situation?
I've come up with an interpretative framework for Byron's politics, which I will lay out very simply and quickly. It's basically a dichotomy between theory and action, and theory and practice. So Byron can say a lot of things, but in his life, he sometimes contradicted his proclamations very, very actively. In a sense, you mentioned the Luddites. Yes, he's delivering a speech in Parliament in favor of the Luddites. He's publishing a poem in the Morning Chronicle called "An Ode to the Luddites." He's there a very fearsome supporter. At the same time, he has this grand estate in Nottinghamshire, Newstead Abbey, some coal mines in Rochdale. So he's a landlord. He's a 19th century landlord. And what does he do? He doubles the rents of his tenants, some of those who were connected to Luddite families, the same time that he's advocating for the Luddite rights in Parliament. So Byron is your typical hypocrite. He can be your typical hypocrite. When it serves his cause, it's a pose sometimes. He's just posing as something. He's an artist. He's a poet. He's not your typical politician. So sometimes he wants to shock. It's all, to use the very famous jargon of the day. It's very performative what he does. Many times there is a sense of theater. So it can be misleading if you just follow his writings and not his actions and his life. And I think the other dichotomy that's very useful in solving the prima facie inconsistencies that are so famous about him is between what's going on in England and what's going on in the continent. So Byron is very radical in Italy, can be very radical in Greece, but he's actually not that radical in Britain, because in Britain there is a differentiating aspect. He holds land, he has a title, he has investment in government bonds, he has social status, so he has a lot to lose. And when it comes to social rebellion or revolution or revolt in Britain, he is horrified by the prospect. And then he reverts to being a very conventional 18th century Whig who loves to support the revolution abroad, but when it comes home, like it pretty much happened for all the Whigs in the close of the 18th century during the French Revolution, oh yes, it's guillotine aristocrats in France, but God forbid that you do the same here. So Byron is your Charles James Fox of the 19th century. I mean, Fox was his political idol, and Fox is another hypocrite. Fox is another one who likes to contradict himself and flip-flop in his political opinions between this and that. I think that Byron is far more conservative than people think, and that's a controversial claim to make. I've tried to advocate that not just in popular books or speeches, but also in a couple of scientific articles that I had published in academic journals. He is more conservative in the sense that he's an 18th century throwback. He's a Fox-eyed Whig. He frequents Holland House, which is this mecca of Whiggery in 19th century London, in where is now Holland Park. It's unfortunately Holland House been razed to the ground by the Luftwaffe during the Blitz. So this is his playing ground, and it's full of aristocrats, elite. He's a big social snob. He doesn't have any time for people who are not of his clique or his class. And then you have the famous Karl Marx quip about Byron, where he basically says that I'm glad he died when he was 36 because he was on his way of becoming a reactionary bourgeoisie. So Marx gets it half wrong because Byron would never be a bourgeoisie because he was a member of the aristocracy. But he was on his way, I think, of becoming more reactionary in his political opinions as he grew older. And you don't have to go far. All his romantic peers, Wordsworth, Robert Southey, Coleridge, all those who survived their youth, because Shelley and Keats are two other famous romantic poets who died very young, like Byron. Those who survived went on to become very famous Victorian conservatives. So it's not difficult to argue that Byron could have followed this same trajectory. Wordsworth is in Paris during the French Revolution. He's thrilled by this new utopia that's coming about with the revolution. And 60 years later, he's your typical conservative Victorian. So I wouldn't have found it very difficult to imagine Byron, rather more fat with whiskers, writing outraged letters to the editor of the Times during the Victorian times, saying how bad things are or how better it was back then, and all of that. But the marshes of Missolonghi claimed him before that, and he died very young. So it's again fictional history. We can't really know. We only have indications about it.
To what extent are we still talking about Byron in the modern age because his works or actions were that good? Or is it more because, as Lady Lamb said, wasn't it, that he is mad, bad, and dangerous to know? Is it the works and his genius, or is it just because he was so out of the ordinary?
Well, this phrase "mad, bad, and dangerous to know" has been so famous down the ages that even someone like Sherlock Braverman used it a couple of weeks ago. So I've been labeled mad, bad, and dangerous to know by my political party. So I don't know if she's read anything of Byron, but she used the term. So yes, there is an element of celebrity. Byron, it is a locus classicus, cultivated his image, self-cultivated his image as perhaps the first celebrity. He was aware of his celebrity status. He was one of the most famous people in his time and age, not just in Europe, but also in America. Just to give you an example, 3 years after his death, his poems keep selling. They are in the top 10 bestsellers in America 3 years after he died. So he is very famous. And I think he gives us enough in his journals, in his writings. He's a prolific writer. He's left so much behind. There is so much evidence behind. And he strikes us as a very modern figure, a very familiar figure in a way that this man lived 200 years ago. And we still talk about him, and we actually talk about him right now as he was alive 20 years ago, because he is a modern figure. He is a popular figure. We can follow his life very closely. We know everything about him. We even know what he liked doing in the privacy of his own bedroom. He's just given us all this information as sort of a trick to keep talking about him after his death. And I think he's led a fascinating life. He was, in some ways, a pioneer. Some other ways, he was a relic of a previous age. So that adds to the romantic nostalgia about him. He loved to shock. He was a cultural icon. Even the shirt à la Biron, which the French keep the open collar shirt. He was a fashion icon. He was many things to many different people. And I think that contributes to his continuing allure.
If we look at, say, The Lost Generation in Paris of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, amazing works, but difficult characters. Would you also put Byron in the genius but jaded box?
Probably you would like to spend an evening or two with Lord Byron. I think he would be good company. He would probably be quite frivolous. He would be fun. We know that. But he could also be difficult. He could be a snob. So if you're not an aristocrat, good luck. Probably he wouldn't really like you. If you're a woman, that's difficult with Byron. He's quite the sexual predator. He's abusive towards women. He doesn't really appreciate women. He doesn't treat them well. So that's an ugly aspect about him that wouldn't be acceptable in the modern age. But you know, he's complex. He has some very ugly sides. He has some very charming sides. He's a very, as it were, faithful friend. He was quite the spendthrift. He was generous. He could be generous, but he could also be very stingy. So it's his Goethe once labeled him, his contemporary German philosopher slash poet, he labeled him as a walking mass of inconsistencies. And I think that labels Byron very aptly. He was a bulk of inconsistencies, many different things to many different people, many different things with himself.